King Althoren of Viremont was born into a court where silence carried more weight than speech. His father ruled briefly and cautiously, hemmed in by nobles who believed the crown existed to balance their power, not command it. From an early age, Althoren learned that authority was not inherited whole, but assembled piece by piece. He watched, listened, and stored every slight like a ledger entry. His education was strict, shaped by tutors who prized discipline over affection. Philosophy taught him order, mathematics taught him precision, and history taught him fear. He read of kingdoms lost not to enemies, but to hesitation. By the time he reached manhood, Althoren believed mercy was a luxury afforded only to stable thrones. When his father died, the court expected a pliable successor. Althoren disappointed them within weeks. He reorganized councils, removed hereditary privileges, and replaced tradition with appointment. Each decision was justified as reform, though its true purpose was consolidation. Resistance followed quickly, but it was fragmented and cautious. Minor lords protested in letters rather than arms, and guild leaders whispered in taverns instead of squares. Althoren responded not with mass punishment, but with selective attention. A complaint answered here, a favor granted there, creating uncertainty instead of unity. The people of Viremont saw in him a ruler who worked tirelessly. Roads were repaired, taxes standardized, and coinage stabilized. Markets flourished under predictability, and merchants praised the crown openly. For many, Althoren's reign felt like progress measured in stone and silver. Yet beneath the visible order ran a deeper current of control. Althoren believed stability depended on constant vigilance. He expanded the royal archives, demanding records of land, labor, and lineage. Knowledge, he reasoned, was the quietest form of power. His court became a place of rigid ritual. Audiences followed strict timing, and even pauses in conversation felt rehearsed. Courtiers learned to stand still for long stretches, waiting for the king's gaze before daring to speak. This discipline was admired by foreign envoys, who mistook tension for reverence. Althoren married not for alliance, but for legitimacy. Queen Marisel came from an ancient house respected by both nobility and clergy. She was intelligent and observant, and her presence softened the king's public image. Together, they projected harmony, though their private conversations were measured and careful. The clergy initially supported Althoren, impressed by his emphasis on order and moral clarity. He funded the restoration of temples and attended ceremonies with visible devotion. Sermons praised obedience as a divine virtue, reinforcing the crown's authority from the pulpit. Faith and governance walked closely during these years. As the kingdom prospered, so did the king's confidence. He began to see dissent not as disagreement, but as disorder. In council, he spoke of restlessness as a disease that spread when left untreated. His advisors learned that caution was interpreted as weakness. Althoren's laws grew increasingly precise. Infractions were categorized, indexed, and assigned escalating consequences. Ambiguity was removed wherever possible, leaving little room for interpretation. The law became a structure where every action had a defined response. Foreign powers viewed Viremont with a mix of admiration and unease. Trade treaties were honored exactly as written, without flexibility or indulgence. Diplomats found negotiations efficient but cold. Althoren never raised his voice, yet conversations with him felt like standing on a narrow ledge. Within the palace, rumors circulated about the king's private studies. He was said to spend long nights examining devices from older regimes, instruments once used to maintain obedience. No proof was offered, and few dared to ask. Curiosity was a liability in Althoren's court. Despite whispers, public loyalty remained strong. Festivals were orderly, crime was low, and the treasury full. Parents taught children to respect the crown, citing peace as evidence of wisdom. Althoren appeared as a monarch who had mastered the balance between strength and prosperity. Still, those closest to him noticed his intolerance for stillness. He paced during meetings, corrected posture unconsciously, and frowned when discussions lingered. To him, motion meant control, and rest suggested vulnerability. This belief shaped his policies more than any written doctrine. By the 10th year of his reign, King Althoren stood unchallenged. The nobility was compliant, the clergy cooperative, and the people accustomed to structure. Viremont moved according to rules that bore his signature, visible or not. The kingdom had learned to remain upright under his gaze, never quite settling into comfort. The turning stool entered the records of Viremont quietly, without proclamation or ceremony. It was listed as a corrective instrument, categorized under balanced discipline rather than punishment. Althoren approved it after reviewing reports that prisoners endured confinement too easily. Rest, he believed, allowed defiance to recover. Guys, can you help me to hit 1,000 subscribers on this channel? And it's my dream. Sorry for interruption. It's humble request. Let's jump into the video. The stool itself appeared unremarkable at first glance. Narrow, backless, and set upon a rounded base, it invited the body into a position of constant attention. Its surface was smooth, offering no grip for hands or thighs. Stability depended entirely on the sitter's awareness. What distinguished the turning stool was its movement. It did not spin freely, nor did it remain still. The base was weighted unevenly, causing a slow, irregular shift whenever pressure changed. Even a relaxed breath altered its center, producing a subtle tilt. Prisoners were placed upon it with their feet barely touching the ground. This prevented grounding without removing the illusion of support. Guards did not restrain the body directly, as restraint suggested struggle. Instead, the stool demanded cooperation while punishing ease. At first, many believed endurance would defeat it. They tightened muscles, locked joints, and focused their gaze on a fixed point. For a short time, balance could be maintained through effort alone. The body responded with tension, mistaking strain for control. Minutes stretched into hours as the stool resisted stillness. Muscles trembled under constant correction, unable to settle into rhythm. Each attempt to relax triggered movement, forcing immediate response. The prisoner learned that rest itself caused imbalance. The mind suffered alongside the body. Anticipation replaced reaction as the primary burden. The sitter waited for the next shift, knowing it would come without warning. This vigilance consumed attention, leaving no space for thought beyond the present moment. Guards were instructed not to intervene unless collapse occurred. Silence was enforced, as sound distracted from the lesson. The chamber was bare, lit evenly, denying shadows that might suggest passage of time. Without markers, endurance became abstract. As hours passed, posture degraded despite effort. Shoulders sagged, necks stiffened, and breathing grew shallow. Each physical adjustment invited further movement from the stool. The body learned that correction created consequence, a cycle without resolution. Althoren's advisors noted that the stool left few visible marks. This appealed to the king's preference for order without spectacle. The effects were internal, manifesting as exhaustion and disorientation rather than injury. Compliance followed without need for escalation. Repeated sessions deepened the impact. Prisoners returned to the stool already anticipating failure. Muscles remembered instability, reacting prematurely to imagined shifts. Balance became not a skill but a source of anxiety, eroding confidence before effort began. Some attempted strategies of surrender. They loosened their bodies, allowing the stool to move beneath them. This led to rapid loss of balance, as the device was designed to punish passivity. Falling brought guards, not relief, and the cycle resumed. Others focused on rhythm, trying to match their breathing to the stool's movement. This failed as well, since the base responded unpredictably. What appeared mechanical proved deliberately inconsistent. The lesson was clear that adaptation offered no refuge. The stool was often used during questioning, though answers were secondary. The true objective was demonstration of authority over the body's instincts. When speech faltered from fatigue, silence was accepted. The posture itself was considered testimony. Observers recorded that time behaved strangely in the chamber. Prisoners lost track of duration, measuring existence by muscle spasms rather than hours. When removed, many could not stand immediately, though no bonds had held them. Althoren reviewed these reports with interest. He noted that subjects spoke differently afterward, choosing words carefully, avoiding unnecessary emphasis. The stool did not extract truth through pain, but through recalibration of behavior. This distinction mattered to him. The method spread within the justice system due to its efficiency. It required little space, minimal supervision, and no specialized training. Its power lay in simplicity, turning the body against itself without visible force. Clerks documented compliance rates increasing after its introduction. Repeat offenses declined, not through fear of injury, but fear of return. The stool lingered in memory as an unresolved experience, unfinished and therefore persistent. Critics within the court questioned its morality in private. They argued that punishment without clear endpoint blurred justice. Althoren dismissed these concerns, stating that clarity lay in obedience, not duration. Order was its own justification. The turning stool became emblematic of the king's philosophy. Control was maintained not by overwhelming strength, but by denying comfort. Balance, once a natural state, was transformed into labor. Stillness was redefined as risk. Those subjected to it carried its lesson beyond the chamber. They stood straighter, spoke cautiously, and avoided pauses that might draw attention. The body remembered what the mind wished to forget. In this way, the stool extended beyond wood and metal. It shaped conduct without presence, enforcing vigilance through memory. Althoren regarded this as success, proof that authority could persist even in absence. By embedding instability into discipline, the king ensured that subjects policed themselves. The turning stool did not need to be seen to be effective. Its influence rested in the constant effort to remain upright, never fully at rest. The influence of the turning stool did not end at the chamber door. Its logic seeped into governance, shaping how Althoren viewed every act of disobedience. He came to believe that instability, once introduced, could maintain itself without constant reinforcement. Fear did not need to shout if it could whisper continuously. Officials trained under this philosophy carried it into their duties. Inspections became longer, procedures more exacting, and tolerance for deviation minimal. Even minor errors were treated as signs of imbalance that required correction. The kingdom functioned smoothly, but with growing rigidity. Among the people, behavior shifted in subtle ways. Conversations shortened, gestures tightened, and gatherings lost their ease. No decree demanded this change, yet it spread as if instructed. The memory of correction traveled faster than law. Queen Maricel noticed the alteration before most. She observed how visitors hesitated before sitting, how courtiers adjusted their stance repeatedly. The court appeared composed, but never relaxed. She warned Althoren that a realm could not live indefinitely in tension. Althoren dismissed her concerns as sentiment. He argued that vigilance was the price of peace. In his view, comfort bred decay, while effort sustained order. The success of his methods reinforced his certainty. Over time, the justice system narrowed its definition of loyalty. Neutrality became suspect, silence interpreted as resistance. The turning stool was no longer reserved for offenders alone, but for those who failed to demonstrate alignment. Presence was not enough, posture mattered. This expansion strained the administration. Skilled officials resigned quietly or requested distant postings. Their replacements were obedient but inexperienced, following rules without understanding. Efficiency began to suffer beneath the weight of procedure. Foreign merchants sensed the shift and adjusted their routes. Negotiations grew brittle, with little room for accommodation. Viremont remained stable, but its influence plateaued. Trade flowed around it rather than through it. Within the palace, Althoren grew increasingly isolated. Advisors spoke cautiously, offering confirmation instead of counsel. Meetings ended quickly, devoid of debate. The king interpreted this as unity. Unaware, it was withdrawal. His health declined under constant strain. Sleep eluded him, and restlessness followed him through the corridors. Physicians advised moderation, but he viewed stillness as surrender. Even alone, he remained upright and alert. The turning stool continued its work without ceremony. Its use required no royal presence, only permission. Local magistrates adopted its principles in lesser forms, replicating instability through schedules, fines, and public expectations. Control became decentralized and harder to trace. Resistance, when it came, did not announce itself openly. It appeared as absence rather than confrontation. Attendance at ceremonies thinned, markets quieted earlier, and petitions slowed. The people complied, but without conviction. Clergy who once praised obedience began to emphasize endurance in their sermons. Faith shifted toward patience rather than loyalty. Althoren noticed the change and reduced their influence, replacing counsel with regulation. The queen withdrew from public life, citing illness. Her absence removed the last visible softness from the throne. Without her presence, the court lost its final illusion of balance. Years passed in this manner, orderly yet brittle. The kingdom resembled a structure held upright by constant effort, unable to lean without risk. Althoren believed this was strength, mistaking endurance for resilience. When disruption finally arrived, it did not come as revolt. A series of minor failures cascaded through the system. Delayed shipments caused shortages, shortages caused unrest, and unrest revealed how little trust remained. The mechanisms of control responded too slowly. Local authorities hesitated, uncertain which rule applied. Fear of error paralyzed decision-making. The very precision that once ensured order now prevented adaptation. Instability spread beyond containment. Althoren attempted to reassert control through stricter measures. More oversight, longer procedures, and expanded correction followed. These efforts intensified strain rather than resolving it. The system resisted change as stubbornly as the stool resisted rest. Within the capital, officials began leaving their posts without notice. Records went unsigned, halls unattended. The absence of bodies revealed how much the kingdom relied on constant participation. Order required presence, and presence was no longer guaranteed. The king convened councils that no longer filled. He addressed chambers that echoed faintly. His voice remained calm, but its authority diminished with each repetition. Control could not function without those willing to uphold it. In private, Althoren returned to the principles that had guided him. He reviewed reports, studied diagrams, and reaffirmed belief in discipline. Yet even he felt the cost of perpetual vigilance pressing inward. The turning stool remained in its chamber, unchanged. Its lesson had been absorbed so thoroughly that it was rarely used. Memory had replaced mechanism, though memory now turned against its creator. As the kingdom adjusted to imbalance, new forms of order emerged. Informal networks replaced rigid systems, adapting quickly where official channels failed. Life continued, uneven but flexible. Althoren witnessed these changes with confusion rather than anger. He had shaped a realm that could stand only through effort, and now effort was withheld. The stool's lesson had taught endurance, but not recovery. By the end of his reign, Viremont no longer feared instability. It had learned to move within it. The balance Althoren enforced dissolved into motion, uncontrolled but alive. His legacy endured not in monuments, but in posture. A generation remembered what it meant to be unable to rest, and chose differently when given the chance. The turning stool faded into history, its power spent, leaving behind a kingdom that finally sat, unsteady yet free.